Welcome to The Debate. Today, we're confronting a biological reality that is, well, it's as inevitable as it is complex: the aging human body. Specifically, we're looking at the mechanism of nutrition. As we age, the fundamental operating system of our existence, how we taste, how we digest, how we metabolize energy, it undergoes this radical and often silent shift.
It's a shift that really changes the rules of the game completely. What worked at 40 doesn't just stop working at 80, it might actually start to hurt you.
Exactly. The source material we're analyzing today is a medical analysis called Safe Geriatric Nutrition. It lays out the principles for, keeping older adults not just alive, but healthy. But within this guidance, we found a pretty profound tension. So the central question we're debating is this: in managing geriatric nutrition, should our primary focus be on rigorous metabolic control and anthropometric surveillance to prevent decline, or does the reality of the aging body demand that we prioritize adaptive strategies for digestive comfort and sensory accommodation just to ensure they eat at all?
Right. To put it simply, do we treat the patient like a machine that needs strict calibration, or like a person who just needs to feel comfortable enough to take a bite?
And I'm here to represent the position that structure and surveillance are paramount. We're dealing with comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes, the specter of sarcopenia. You can't manage these silent killers with vibes and comfort food. Nutrition in this context has to be treated as a strict medical regimen with constant data monitoring.
And I'll be representing the position that digestive and sensory adaptation has to come first. Strict regimens fail, they just do, if they ignore the physiological realities mentioned right there in the text. Reduced gastric acid, impaired chewing, diminished taste. If the machine physically cannot process the fuel, it doesn't matter how high grade that fuel is on paper.
So let's get into the details. I want to start with this concept of autoregulation. In a healthy younger adult, the body is a pretty good narrator of its own needs. You get hungry, you eat. You get thirsty, you drink. But the source material makes it very clear that age-related physiological changes, they break that narration.
The narration changes, absolutely.
It doesn't just change, it becomes unreliable. And that is why I'm arguing for a surveillance-heavy approach. The text explicitly calls for anthropometric surveillance. Now, for our listeners, that probably sounds intense, but it basically means rigorous measurement of the human body. We aren't just talking about stepping on a scale, we are talking about tracking waist circumference and body fat percentage systematically.
Which, let's be honest, is not exactly a fun Tuesday afternoon for an 80-year-old.
Well, it's not about fun, it's about survival. The margin for error just vanishes in geriatrics. We are trying to detect specific pathologies, and the big one the text highlights is sarcopenia. This is the involuntary loss of skeletal muscle mass and strength. It's a major cause of frailty, of falls, of fractures. If you aren't measuring muscle mass versus fat mass, you might completely miss it. A patient could weigh the exact same amount on the scale, but they've lost 2 pounds of muscle and gained 2 pounds of fat. That is a disastrous trade-off that leads to central adipocity, which only exacerbates cardiovascular risks. If you aren't measuring rigorously, you are flying blind.
I understand the fear of flying blind, I do. But I think you're looking at the instrument panel while the plane is falling apart. You talk about the patient as this passive subject that we just need to measure. But the text explicitly warns us about physical barriers that make those measurements moot if we don't address them first. We're talking about oral health issues, specifically impaired chewing and swallowing. We're talking about reduced gastric acid secretion and slowed motility.
Which are factors, certainly.
They aren't just factors, they are walls. Let's just break down slowed motility. The digestive tract is a conveyor belt. In older age, that belt slows down. Food sits longer in the stomach. It causes bloating, early fullness, real discomfort. So if you present a patient with a meal that is theoretically perfect for their waist circumference data, but it is physically difficult to chew or sits like a brick in their stomach because of low acid, they will not eat it.
Which is exactly why the plan must be structured. You can't just leave it up to how they feel on a given day.
But structure implies rigidity, and rigidity breaks when the system is fragile. My view is that data collection is useless if the intake is zero. The source also mentions diminished taste and smell, and this is a huge psychological hurdle. Eating is a sensory experience. If we treat food purely as a metabolic intervention to fix a data point on a chart, we ignore the fact that the gentler approach is often the only one that actually results in calories being consumed. If the food is clinically perfect but unpalatable, the nutrition plan fails, period.
I think that line of reasoning creates a false dichotomy. You're suggesting we have to choose between palatable and clinically appropriate. I'm saying clinically appropriate is the priority and palatability has to work around it. The source material emphasizes meal regularity to stabilize glycemia and energy levels. This is crucial for diabetics, which is a common comorbidity here. So if we prioritize comfort to the point where we allow erratic eating habits because the patient doesn't feel like it, we risk dangerous blood sugar fluctuations. Precision is the safety net. You can have palatable food, sure, but it has to fit within a rigid temporal and compositional framework.
See, meal regularity is a goal we share, but we disagree on how to get there. You don't achieve regularity by forcing a schedule on a system with slowed motility. You achieve it by providing food that passes through the system with ease of digestion. That is the specific phrase the text uses. If a patient is bloated or in pain because we forced a quote-unquote balanced meal that their gut couldn't handle, they will skip the next meal regardless of your schedule. Comfort drives compliance. You can't schedule your way out of indigestion.
Okay, let's dig deeper into what that balanced meal actually looks like, because this brings us to the core of the friction: metabolic rigidity versus digestive reality. The source material calls for a balanced dietary composition involving specific ratios of protein, fat, and complex carbohydrates.
And balanced is such a tricky word in this context.
It's a necessary word. We are dealing with patients who often have dyslipidemia, that's high cholesterol or fats in the blood, and diabetes. The chemical composition of the food dictates their immediate health outcomes. We need complex carbohydrates to manage the insulin response so they don't crash. We need specific proteins to fight that muscle wasting we just talked about. My concern with your adaptive approach is that it often drifts towards simple starches or soft fats because they are just easier to eat, and that disregards the metabolic chaos they can create. The text implies that because of these comorbidities, the chemistry is more important than the immediate experience of eating.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the chemistry matters if the biology rejects it. You cited complex carbohydrates. In a healthy 30-year-old, complex carbs, fiber, whole grains, are great. They regulate sugar, they keep you full. But in a geriatric patient with reduced gastric acid, fiber-heavy complex carbohydrates can be a source of significant distress. They sit in the gut, they ferment, they cause bloating.
But the text explicitly mentions fiber is needed to support bowel function. You can't just remove it.
It does, but it also advocates for gentler preparations. And this is the crux of the disagreement. You can have a meal that looks balanced on a spreadsheet, perfect macros, perfect fiber, but if the gastrointestinal function is compromised, that meal isn't being absorbed properly. It's just an irritant. I would argue that balance has to be redefined as what the gut can actually process. A clinically perfect meal that causes obstruction or reflux is not a nutritional win, it's a medical event.
That's a fair point regarding absorption, but I worry about the slippery slope. Without structure, without a commitment to that balanced composition, patients drift into malnutrition. The text calls for structured meal planning and intake tracking. One cannot manage what one does not measure. If we prioritize digestive comfort too highly, we might end up feeding them broth and white rice. Sure, it's digestible, sure, it's gentle, but it leads straight to sarcopenia. We need to track the intake to ensure that even if the preparation is gentle, the nutrient density remains high.
And I agree with the need for nutrient density, but I disagree that tracking is the solution to the problem. Tracking tells you they didn't eat. It doesn't tell you why. The why is almost always pain, discomfort, or fear. You mentioned that rigidity prevents meal skipping. I argue the opposite. If eating is a chore or a source of fear due to choking or indigestion, they will skip.
Prioritizing comfort, making the experience of eating painless, is the only way to ensure the nutrients actually get inside the body.
This brings us naturally to the specific vehicle of nutrition mentioned in the text. And I know you want to talk about soup.
Oh, I absolutely want to talk about soup. The source material specifically recommends the inclusion of soups, and I think this is the skeleton key for geriatric nutrition. It frames soup not just as a meal, but as a solution to multiple physiological failures at the same time.
It is certainly a useful tool, but I hesitate to call it a solution.
Well, consider the evidence. First, it addresses impaired chewing and swallowing. Dysphagia, difficulty swallowing, is a massive risk. Soup mitigates it instantly. Second, it addresses palatability. You can pack so much flavor into a liquid base to overcome that diminished taste and smell we talked about. But third, and perhaps most critically, it solves hydration.
The hydration point is valid.
It's critical. The text emphasizes water intake heavily. And why? Because older adults often lose their thirst drive. The hypothalamus, which signals thirst, becomes less sensitive. They literally do not know they are dehydrated until they are dizzy or confused. Soup is food and water in one. It bypasses the need for a separate thirst signal. It is the ultimate adaptive strategy.
That is a compelling argument, and I acknowledge the utility of soup for hydration and swallowing safety. But I see a significant risk in relying on it too heavily as a primary food source. The source emphasizes fiber to support bowel function. There's a very real danger that a diet capable of being sipped lacks the structural fiber necessary to keep the gut moving. Liquid diets can often lead to constipation for that very reason. Furthermore, liquid calories can be deceptive.
Deceptive out.
In two ways. Either they are not nutrient-dense enough, basically just salty water, leading to the unintentional weight loss we are trying to avoid, or they are too calorie-dense, full of cream and fat without providing satiety. Chewing is part of the satiety signaling mechanism. When you chew, your brain gets the signal that you're eating. If we bypass chewing entirely, we risk disrupting the very metabolic regulation the text argues we need to maintain. We need solids, or at least semi-solids, to deliver those complex carbohydrates and proteins in a way that sustains muscle retention without spiking visceral fat.
But oral health issues act as a hard gatekeeper here. You can argue for the metabolic benefits of chewing solid steak or fibrous vegetables all day long, but if the patient has loose teeth, ill-fitting dentures, or dysphagia, that fiber isn't structural support for the gut. It is a choking hazard. It is a safety risk. You can't prioritize metabolic optimization over the immediate risk of aspiration.
I concede the swallowing risk is paramount. However, the solution isn't to abandon texture, but to employ iterative evaluation. The text lists this under monitoring. We shouldn't just default to soup because it's easy. We should evaluate. Can they handle soft solids? Can they handle minced foods? We should preserve as much structure as safety allows to maintain bowel function and metabolic normalcy.
4. If we push the limits of their chewing ability in the name of bowel function, we induce anxiety, and anxiety shuts down appetite. If they are afraid to eat, they won't eat. Simple as that.
Let's zoom out to the broader philosophy of how we manage this care. We've touched on it, but I want to center on the concept of monitoring itself. The text is very clear. This is a continuous approach involving anthropometric surveillance.
Which again sounds like we are managing a prison population, not our grandparents.
It sounds like we are managing a complex biological system that is prone to catastrophic failure. The goal, as stated, is reducing risks of metabolic complications. These are silent killers. You cannot see hypertension, you cannot always see the early stages of sarcopenia just by looking at a person in a sweater. You need the data. When the waist circumference changes, that triggers an immediate dietary adjustment. It is a feedback loop. If you are not measuring, you are guessing. And in medicine, guessing gets people killed.
That's dramatic, but look at the other side. The goal of the source material is also explicitly improving quality of life. I ask you to consider the quality of life of an 85-year-old who is constantly being weighed, measured with tape, having their skin pinched for body fat percentages, and being told what they can and cannot eat based on a chart. It can be dehumanizing. It can be stressful. And stress, as we know, impacts digestion and metabolism. Cortisol spikes are not going to help your metabolic control.
So how can you prevent unintentional weight loss without the data? If you wait until their clothes don't fit, you have already lost the battle. The weight loss has already happened. The muscle is gone. And in a geriatric patient, regaining that muscle is incredibly difficult.
You prevent weight loss by making the food appealing despite sensory changes. You prevent it by engaging the desire to eat. If the food smells incredible, overcoming that diminished sense of smell, and if it tastes savory and rich, the patient eats. If the patient eats, weight is maintained naturally. You don't need a tape measure to tell you if someone is enjoying their dinner. You need eyes and empathy.
But enjoyment is not a proxy for nutritional adequacy. That is the flaw in your argument. A patient might enjoy eating nothing but ice cream and broth. That would satisfy your requirement for palatability and ease of digestion, but it would be a metabolic disaster. It would lead to central adiposity, fat gathering around the organs, and a complete lack of the micronutrients mentioned in the text. The surveillance ensures that what is being consumed is actually doing the work of maintenance. We are fighting entropy here.
And I am arguing that we are fighting despair. The text mentions sensory changes for a reason. Eating is one of the last remaining pleasures for many geriatric patients. If we turn every meal into a medical dosage that must be tracked and calibrated, we strip that pleasure away. And when the pleasure goes, the appetite goes, and then your metrics crash anyway.
I see why you think that, but I believe the text offers a middle ground that, well, it leans towards my side. It calls for menu planning and intake tracking. This implies a professionalization of the process. It's not just about, does it taste good? It's about, did we hit the protein targets to prevent frailty? It transforms the meal into a protective measure.
And I would argue that menu planning is exactly where my philosophy shines. A good menu plan isn't a spreadsheet of nutrients. It's a culinary strategy that incorporates soups and gentler preparations to trick the aging body into accepting the nutrition it needs. It's about being smarter than the decline. It's about hiding the medicine in the pudding, metaphorically speaking.
It seems we are at a crossroads between the what and the how.
Always. You focus on the what, the nutrients, the data, the muscle mass. I focus on the how, the chewing, the tasting, the digesting.
To bring this to a close, let me summarize my position in light of our discussion. While I agree that comfort is a necessary component of compliance, I firmly believe that safety comes from structure. The preventive nature of the source material requires us to treat nutrition as a metabolic intervention. We must focus on glycemia stabilization through meal regularity and strictly monitor body composition to fight sarcopenia. We cannot simply hope that appetite will preserve muscle mass. We have to verify it with hard data.
And I maintain that safety comes from adaptation. Recognizing the physiological realities of reduced gastric acid, slowed motility, and oral health issues means we have to prioritize the ease of digestion and palatability above rigid metrics. If we ignore the sensory and mechanical limitations of the aging body, the most scientifically perfect diet in the world will remain on the plate, uneaten. We have to design for the body that is, not the body we want on a chart.
Ultimately, the text pushes for an individualized approach, and perhaps that is the synthesis here. The perfect diet lies somewhere between the rigorous data I advocate for to ensure the machine keeps running and the adaptive empathy you champion to ensure the fuel can actually get in.
Exactly. You need the data to know what to aim for, but you need the comfort and the flavor to actually hit the target. It's not one or the other. It's a constant negotiation between the lab results and the dinner table.
A negotiation worth getting right. We encourage our listeners to look at the menu planning in their own lives, whether for themselves or loved ones, through these dual lenses: metabolic necessity versus physiological reality.
It's complicated, but it's vital.
Thank you for listening. This has been The Debate.